On Friday, I left my Volvo at the repair shop and chose to ride back home with one of the service workers instead of going back to the office. He offered to bring my car back on his return trip. With tasks in the garden awaiting me on this warm, late spring afternoon, I opted to remain at home. While clearing leaves in our spacious backyard, I noticed my brother's red Corvette pulling into the drive, which concerned me. Approaching, I overheard my son Sam mistakenly addressing him as Dad, which puzzled me. My brother mentioned he was returning Uncle Joe's circular saw and jokingly called me Clueless Joe, which stung a little. Upset by this, I discreetly recorded the conversation on my smartphone. Sam expressed his desire to spend more time at my brother's place now that school was out, and he revealed how frequently my wife visited there, which shocked me. My son openly questioned why my wife hasn't divorced me to live with my brother, and suddenly things began to click, leaving me deeply shaken. Eric boasted that since he impregnated your mother, he has been pressuring her every month to divorce me. She refuses, saying that although you're an excellent lover, you'd make a terrible husband. She appreciates her marriage, not the intense physical connection we share. Her husband makes her feel loved. She loves him, not me. That's why she remains with me, but sometimes sees Eric. I have to leave now, but I'll see you tomorrow at your grandparents' for the family gathering. At that instant, my legs buckled, and I collapsed against the garage wall into the garden, heartbroken. Finding out that my son isn't biologically mine was devastating. Discovering my wife's affair with my brother, resulting in her pregnancy, was unbearable. Somehow I managed to return to my office, collapsing on the rope swing where I used to push my son happily. I sat there crying until a puddle formed beneath me. Before making any decisions, I needed to evaluate my circumstances. Then, it occurred to me about the DNA test we had all taken. But what if my wife tampered with the results, substituting Eric's sample with mine? That would hide the truth about our son's paternity. Feeling betrayed, I re-evaluated my life. I am Joe Tyndall, 43 years old, and still maintaining my college weight of 175 lbs. Although my passion for running is now limited by family and work obligations, I still manage to run a few miles weekly, occasionally participating in charity runs. I hold dual roles as Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer at Tyndall Machine Company in my hometown, A. Family business spanning generations, originally founded by my great-grandfather, a blacksmith. Over the years, we have specialized in precision components for the aerospace and metal replacement sectors. My father, Edward, is the president, while my brother, Eric, who never completed college, is the chief marketing officer. My father honed his skills at a prestigious trade school, while I obtained bachelor's degrees in industrial engineering and accounting. Unlike me, my younger brother, Eric, who excelled as a high school football running back, pursued a degree in physical education in college mainly to maintain his football eligibility. Despite his lack of specific skills, Eric's strong people skills and recognizable name have been vital in cultivating and maintaining client relationships for the Tyndalls. Although we occasionally disagree, such as on commission structures, our distinct roles ultimately complement each other, contributing to the success of our family business. I first noticed my wife Carol at a charity 5K run. Her impressive build immediately attracted me. Although I had encountered numerous attractive women, Carol stood out with her slender waist and toned muscles. Initially captivated, it was her stumble during the race that sparked our first conversation, which eventually led to our relationship. Carol, an English teacher with a secondary education degree, and I got married a year after we met by chance. Despite our enthusiasm to start a family, conceiving proved difficult despite our meticulous planning. Reluctant to undergo fertility tests, we focused on enjoying our marriage. It wasn't until Carol missed her period twice that we received our joyous news. Growing up, I realized the importance of family, especially within our tightly knit community, where the Tyndall family maintained a significant influence. Our parents' home was adorned with family photos, showcasing our connection to our roots. Carol's pregnancy was challenging. She was bedridden for the final 2 months, and the delivery was fraught with difficulties, nearly costing her and our newborn son their lives. Our son Sam grew too big for a natural birth, necessitating a cesarean section. During this operation, the doctor warned of the severe risks of future pregnancies, prompting us to opt for a surgical solution to avoid further danger to Carol's health. Sam's birth became even more precious to us, knowing he would be our only child. Sam was an energetic boy, always eager to engage in playful roughhousing with me, although Carol did not always approve. As he grew older, our relationship began to deteriorate, particularly after his 15th birthday. Our once strong bond suffered as he became more detached, immersed in his phone and video games. He seemed to disparage my profession as an accountant, perceiving it as less masculine than others. Clearly, he had outgrown me in both physical and emotional aspects, which led to increasing tension between us over time. Carol remained an outstanding wife, excelling in her role as principal at McKinley School, which caters to students with academic and social challenges, including aggression. However, the stress of dealing with disruptive students occasionally caused conflicts at home, with Carol expressing her frustration over trivial matters. Despite this, our closeness remained intact, with no issues in our personal relationship. My world came crashing down when I inadvertently overheard my brother confess to Sam that he was Sam's biological father, hinting at a long-standing affair with Carol. Doubts plagued me, particularly as Sam resembled both my brother and my father, leading me to question the reality. That evening I watched Carol for any signs of unfaithfulness but found none. We shared a lively dinner, and later, alone in the kitchen, Carol caught me off guard by wearing just a lace apron. Despite my uncertainties, our intimacy that night was passionate and sincere, reaffirming our connection. The next Saturday, we visited my parents' house to celebrate my father Edward's 70th birthday. Carol preferred driving her Lexus over my Volvo, and Sam opted to drive separately. Upon arrival, my mother Sally greeted us with hugs in a particular order: Carol, Sam, then me, mirroring the sequence for Edward. Observing Eric's interaction with Carol, I noted his warm embrace toward Sam, followed by a cursory hug from Carol. This behavior heightened my suspicions about their extended affair. My efforts to discreetly uncover the truth echoed Inspector Clouseau's clumsy detective work, aiming to uncover any concealed realities. During a pause in the conversation, I casually inquired about Eric's availability to cover for me at the office, well aware of his lack of experience in accounting. His ambiguous response about a major project further confirmed my suspicions, as Carol's uneasy reaction made it obvious. An eerie silence fell over the room, quieter than a midnight graveyard. All eyes darted among the five of us, a clear indication that they were aware of the adultery hidden behind my feigned ignorance. I grasped the situation as my father began talking, expressing his pride in our family's real estate and business legacy. He announced his retirement as president of Tyndall, naming Eric as his successor. However, the unequal salary arrangement favoring Eric left me feeling uneasy. Carol's comforting gesture did little to alleviate my concerns. The idea of Eric, lacking essential expertise, leading the company seemed disastrous. Eric's display of superiority over me only heightened my frustration. It appeared that once more I was destined to be overshadowed. Enough, Dad, I interrupted. Eric, you're not taking charge. I remain chairman, and you'll manage the company as I direct. This company has been in our family for a century, and I will not let it fail under my watch. We are Tyndalls, holding our legacy in our hands like the men in those portraits. Dad pointed toward the family pictures. So, settle down. By the way, Dad, which one is your grandfather? I inquired. My grandfather is on the left. Next to him is my father. And I am at the far end, Dad responded, gazing at the photos. I noticed I did not look like any Tyndall. I don't understand, I admitted. My mother's face changed. Joe, it's time you knew, Dad revealed. Your mother and I were set to marry, but she became pregnant during her hen party. While we were close, I believed you were solely mine until a genetic test proved otherwise when you reached the age of 10. However, Eric, that revelation shed light on why I received different treatment from him. It wasn't as shocking as I had expected. I was in search of the truth about Sam's biological father, but encountered this discovery instead. Suddenly, everything was flipped upside down. There was little I could do, yet it raised numerous questions for me. Eventually, Mum spoke up, stating, "This doesn't mean we love you any less than Eric. We raised you as our own, and you are still our son in our eyes." It was comforting to hear her say that, but how did this relate to what I overheard between Sam and Eric? Okay, Dad, this explains my features, but why doesn't Sam resemble me? Like you and Eric, here's another jolt for them. Joe, you and Carol faced challenges in having children. It deeply affected Carol, who worried she might not live up to your expectations. She recalled your health records and suspected you might be sterile. Your father and I believed Eric could provide what you could not. We intended to keep this hidden, but DNA tests and the distinct differences between Tyndall and non-Tyndall physiques were telling my mind was swirling with a torrent of emotions. I found it hard to comprehend this information. Both my mother and wife held me close, tears streaming down their faces. Mother softly said, "My son, I am so proud of you," Carol whispered. My husband, "Ben, I cherish you deeply," Dad stated. "We hoped you would understand and feel the love your family has for you." "Oh, now that I know you're not my biological son, may I call you Edward? Why would you think I'd not be upset by this?" Sam retorted sharply. "You can see the humiliation I've faced with kids thinking you're my father instead of a true man like Eric." "Wow," Sam, Carol exclaimed sharply, capturing everyone's attention with a slap to his face. Carol intervened. "Joe has been an outstanding father to you, doing everything possible to make you happy." "I've seen many children with lesser fathers, but none better," I remarked sarcastically. "You're lucky to have him." "Why delay revealing your concerns about my feelings?" I pressed on. "Why not reveal it rather than deceive me all these years?" "You must have had your fun laughing behind my back," as I boasted about my wonderful son, while you thought I was oblivious. Once again, silence filled the room. "We couldn't tell you, Joe. It would have been too painful, and we never wanted it to come out," Dad explained. "Moreover, we needed you at the factory. You are the brains and creativity leading us. Losing you would have been catastrophic, and honestly, we couldn't afford to hire someone else. Headhunters showed us salaries for CFO and KEO positions way above what we offered you." "I can't digest all this," I declared. "You encouraged my brother to father my wife's child, not me. You kept my wages low to boost profits. You led me to believe I'd inherit the business someday, but it seems Tyndall heritage is valued more than talent." "I can't handle any more revelations today," I said bitterly. "Next, you'll probably claim my beloved wife continues her affair with my detestable brother. Will her confession be the big reveal, or will she continue to lie as she has for 17 years?" Once again, the room fell silent. Glances were exchanged among the culpable, none brave enough to refute the serious accusations. Finally, a feeble voice murmured, "I'm sorry, Gio. I truly am, but you must understand the pressure and strain I face at work. I don't love him, I despise him for who he is, but I need him to maintain my sanity." With that, she collapsed to the ground. My instincts pushed me to console her, but reason held me back. She had brought this on herself and now had to face the consequences. "Sorry about this, son, but what hypocrisy," I cut in. "You've devastated my entire life, showing minimal love compared to Eric, fostering my wife's infidelity and imposing Eric's child on me, all the while ridiculing my naivety." I headed for the exit, hurling a fervent "screw you" at each person as I approached the door. Suddenly, a hand gripped my arm. "I'll stop seeing your wife, she's worn out anyway," Eric declared. His audacity infuriated me. I tried to leave, but Eric spun me back around. Grasping the moment, I swung to strike his nose but ended up hitting his throat instead. His eyes bulged, and he collapsed, struggling to breathe. This was my opportunity. I stepped back and delivered a forceful kick to his groin, making him wail in agony. Carol and Sam rushed to help him, each showing different emotions. Sam tended to his mother's partner while hurling insults at me. Carol, meanwhile, vented her fury by kicking Eric repeatedly. Escaping the chaos, I rammed Carol's car into Eric's Corvette and scraped Edward's F-150 in my upheaval. Desperate for a respite, I stopped at a secluded gas station where waves of sadness and anger overcame me. I pounded on the dashboard in frustration, eventually succumbing to exhaustion in the midst of the turmoil. I ignored Carol's efforts to reach me. Taking a deep breath, I weighed my options. The damage was irreversible. I found myself not only deceived but also not genetically linked to the man I had believed to be my father. It was a complete catastrophe. Just days earlier, I had felt on top of the world. Now, everything had turned bitter, yet in the confusion, I saw potential avenues. Option 1, keep denying, accept a promotion but work beneath Eric or Edward, despite the dread of daily encounters with Eric and Carol. Option 2, quietly vanish, leaving the Tyndall family to fend for themselves, despite their previous indifference toward me. Neither choice was appealing. Option 3, remain and infiltrate the family, not for their sake but to make them rue every wrong they had done to me. Indeed, I chose door number 3. With my home just 20 minutes away, I needed to move quickly. I abandoned the battered car in the yard and packed necessities into my Volvo. Sam's dog lingered, a persistent annoyance, but even his parting gift, a mound of feces, couldn't quash my determination. Amidst chuckles, I deposited the fresh dog waste in our bedroom, placing it atop our wedding ring quilt, a cherished item. Embellished with patterns and fabrics from our youth, I crowned it with my wedding ring, sending a definitive message Carol would grasp. Simultaneously, I drove nails through all the framed pictures of her and Eric's son, shattering the glass. With my Volvo packed, I checked into a long-stay hotel on the other side of town, then switched to a rental car to remain undetected. Afterwards, I concealed Sam's car in a storage unit, planning to sell it eventually. Over pizza and beer in my room, I concentrated on securing my financial assets and closing shared accounts. I left Carol 2 paychecks in our account, taking the remainder, including Sam's college fund, which I had slowly withdrawn. Sleep eluded me as I reminisced about happier times. Realizing my loved ones didn't care, I adopted a new identity, not as the oblivious Joe, but as Formidable Joe. Tomorrow, Formidable Joe was set to act at Tyndall Manufacturing. With Sunday being typically quiet at the office, it promised some diversion. Strangely, this notion allowed me to rest slightly easier. I parked my rental car far from the entrance to avoid suspicion. After disabling and then reactivating the security system, I proceeded to my office. As CFO, I had access to all financial records, consolidating assets into the primary account. I ensured there was enough for 2 staff payrolls, maximized the credit line, and transferred the remainder to our account in the Cayman Islands, a notorious hub for global transactions. I then secured all accounts with new passwords to prevent future access. Smirking, I altered the postal address and dispatched termination notices for utilities and services. Leveraging our cloud-based system, I erased all financial records and revised access permissions, even for the CNC machines. Next, I searched Eric's computer, uncovering damaging evidence and preserving it for future use. I left his computer intact, savoring the anticipation of imminent revenge. The utility room was my final destination, a fortified space surrounded by concrete walls containing the main electrical line for Tyndall Manufacturing. Given our extensive use of electricity, an error could immediately incinerate someone. Only the electrician and myself could enter this room, and bureaucratic delays would hinder any electrical work. I stopped all activities and replaced the locks, which delayed the resumption of power when tampering with the main transformer box was found. Upon leaving, I discarded all the keys in a container of cleaning solution, erasing their markings. It was emotional to exit the building I had imagined as my career-long workplace. My dreams of leading Tyndall Manufacturing with Sam as my heir became distressing nightmares. Having attended many industry conventions while at Tyndall, I now viewed them as opportunities to seek employment, ignoring numerous messages from my family. Their apologies and explanations felt hollow. My mother's plea for forgiveness for her previous actions struck a chord, but I found it hard to forgive Carol and Sam's deceit after 17 years. On Tuesday morning, I called my attorney, Bob Carson, to explore my options and secure legal representation. He had availability at 3 p.m. Thus, I returned to my apartment to gather the needed documents. My intention was leaning towards seeking a divorce based on infidelity, though relocating my wife out of state for this seemed unlikely. Nevertheless, I expressed my desire to avoid child support payments and proposed an equitable division of assets, as I did not hold shares in Tyndall Manufacturing and relied only on a modest salary and patent income. My attorney expected the process to be straightforward unless she contested it. We aimed to file the papers quickly, ideally at her workplace, where she had humiliated me for years. In our meeting, I disclosed reallocating Tyndall funds, using my CFO position to transfer funds between banks legally. My attorney cautioned about potential legal ramifications, but I contended that my limited resources would deter significant legal expenses. He stressed the need for a $3,000 retainer fee and recommended prudence in upcoming legal challenges. Shortly, I was in meetings where companies showed interest in my services and patent access. With supportive friends nearby, I preferred not to overstay, so leaving seemed the best option. At 43, starting over seemed like my sole way out of this trouble. A week later, Bob Carson informed me of complications at the county attorney's office. Edward had accused me of embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand theft, though all the funds were still in a Tyndall account. Edward's fear of flying, especially over water, limited his ability to handle the situation in the Cayman Islands. A month after Carol received the divorce papers, my attorney asked if I had responded to her communication efforts. I had disregarded all her attempts. Legal disputes emerged with Carol challenging my entitlement to Sam's college fund and car. Despite doubts about winning in court, I offered concessions if dissatisfied, threatening legal recourse by asserting fraud based on my belief that I was Sam's biological father. A week later, the attorney reported that Carol was ready to sign the papers but asked for an hour with me. I reluctantly agreed, specifying that only Carol and I would meet, and insisted on recording the meeting for security. The next week, I parked in my old driveway, wary of unknown vehicles. Carol welcomed me, showing no romantic intentions but rather stacks of documents that represented the definitive end of our marriage. There was no romantic atmosphere, it was strictly formal. Over the next 15 minutes, she repeated familiar excuses and apologies typical of an unfaithful partner. Her words left me unaffected. I no longer counted the apologies and requests for reconciliation. She even revisited our past, trying to justify my assumed wrongdoings. When she pressed for details, I remained calm, leading her to confess too many errors. My demeanor showed no anger, only a deep detachment. Seeing my disinterest, she tried to engage me. "Do you have any questions?" I looked at her and asked, "Why?" She sighed and began, I felt compelled to have Eric's child. Edward insisted on preserving the Tyndall lineage, fearing Eric's progeny wouldn't meet our family standards. Even when we attempted for Sam, I wished he could be yours, but I made a grave mistake. The notion of assigning her the same stigma Edward despised seemed enticing. "I'll have her stew in her own regret for a bit," I answered. "Your rationale is shocking, Carol. Persisting with Eric after conceiving, was that in the interest of preserving our family cohesion? Did you take pleasure in covertly humiliating me?" I yelled. "No, Carol, this was about you, not me. You vowed fidelity, yet you engaged intimately with my brother. Who deems that permissible? It's irrelevant if I miscommunicated. Joe, what I intended was, it was more concerning me than you when I decided on Eric's baby. I recognized he wasn't as caring as you. He was egocentric, focusing on his own pleasure, not mine. I eagerly anticipated liberating myself from his demands. Once with child, I ceased relations with him. Henceforth, my attention was on you, the man who genuinely cherished and esteemed me. Having felt your love, I appreciated you even further. So you returned to him because I was an exceptional lover. That's absurd. This might sound severe, but this entire Eric ordeal seems dreadful. Go ahead, just hasten and narrate this mournful tale about your need to cope. Dealing with the challenging man wasn't enjoyable, was it? Please, Joe, I'm left with merely an hour to convey the remainder of my existence with you. I still adore you, though I recognize I've forfeited my opportunity with you. I merely wish to persuade you that my actions were entirely unconnected to my bond with you. You were magnificent to me, the ideal husband a woman could desire, but I possess a defect. I've been highly prosperous in my life, and occasionally that leads to arrogance. I start to believe I'm superior, wiser, and more discerning than my colleagues. I lose my compassion for others and turn into a conceited snob, and you're aware that I do. I required a man who could be stringent with me, and Eric suited that role. Joe, this flaw manifested after your mother and father persuaded me to conceive with Eric rather than you. You mean when I was treated akin to an animal for breeding? I interjected. I suppose it was somewhat akin to that. There were no displays of affection. We disrobed, made love, and I departed without any post-love cuddling or kissing. I discovered that I enjoyed the act of love-making, not the affectionate, tender love-making we shared. My universe would consist of his forceful thrusts, as my hair was yanked back and I gazed at the ceiling. My husband, my school, and my family ceased to exist, just the explosions in my head and the intense warmth in me after climaxing. Right after, I'd promptly shower, dress, and leave without a farewell kiss. There was no set timetable for our subsequent encounters. I'd only contact him when I craved rough, primal lovemaking, sometimes twice a month, other times there'd be a 3-month hiatus. Eric was indifferent to how often I visited him. In short, Joe, I reverted to Eric because it humbled me. I needed to be knocked off my pedestal and cease being so haughty. Rough love-making fulfilled a necessity I couldn't tame. It wasn't because you were deficient as a lover. I had a distinct need. Furthermore, I felt embarrassed to have you bestow me with the tenderness and affection I sought from Eric. You're a compassionate, loving individual who always treated me regally. Instead of seeking therapy, I used him to address my superiority complex. Reflecting back, I acknowledge I made an enormous blunder, and I regret harming the finest man I've ever known. Eventually, when this is past us, I hope you'll recall the joyful moments we shared. That's quite a narrative, but do I truly possess all the facts, or is there more I asked? She answered softly. Yes, you know it all. Are you sure? I pressed. Let's review what I might have overlooked. When was the last time you were intimate with him? I asked. It was after that horrendous event at your parents' house when I was assaulting his kidneys, she confessed. And did he use protection? I probed. She shook her head. Did you ever contemplate the risk of contracting an STD from Eric? I further questioned. She responded with a shrug, indicating her uncertainty. Did we ever engage sexually on the same day you were with Eric? I inquired. She blanched at the question. I always cleansed myself afterward, both there and at home, she replied. But that doesn't answer my question. How many times, Carol? I insisted. Not many, Joe, but there were times you really needed closeness, and I didn't want to refuse you. Then she suggested oral intimacy as an alternative to intercourse. She continued, now that you've dodged the question, let's address the truth. Did you ever give me sloppy seconds? I inquired. I didn't log it. I didn't want to hurt you, but there could have been a few instances over the years when it happened. I can't give you an exact number, but it's possible, she admitted. The lasagna I consumed for lunch at Mama Anna's restaurant stirred in my stomach like the simmering lava of Vesuvius. The idea of enduring sloppy seconds was intolerable. Similar to Vesuvius, the fiery lava spewed from my mouth in a forceful projectile vomit. The table and Carol were quickly soaked with the remnants of my earlier meal. I made my way to the door, leaving a trail of partially digested food. Carol's shrieks reached my ears as I left. Clearly she was not pleased with vomit on her carpet or dress. Regrettably, my lawyer had to reprint the documents since no one at the courthouse would touch them post-incident. 2 weeks later, the divorce was completed with me obtaining half of the college fund and car proceeds. She retained the house until our son completed high school. I believed he was distraught, but since he no longer desired my presence in his life, I took my share and departed. Since I was not the biological father, I declined to pay child support if required by court. I modified the filing to infidelity and threatened to sue all the Tyndalls for fraud. Nobody desired that scandal. I felt humiliated being connected to the Tyndall name. During my voluntary seclusion, I debated whether to examine the video files I had acquired from Eric's office. I was still shocked by Carol's infidelity, far from prepared to see two individuals engaged in intimacy. The thought of intercourse repelled me. Each file bore a name, and a shiver went through me as I noticed the name Sindra on one of the smaller files. Sindra was the spouse of one of my closest friends, John Brown. John was 2 grades ahead of me in high school, and we had minimal interaction since he was a celebrated athlete and I was an academic outsider. However, this nerd was selected to aid the athlete in his required English class while he shone in science and math. He had difficulties with English. Throughout the semester, a friendship developed until he left for a small college on a football scholarship. After his graduation, he returned to our town to stay close to his aging parents. He approached me regarding employment, and I was happy to find that the focus was on math and engineering, aligning well with our shop. Following my endorsement, he was employed, and our friendship was re-established a couple of years back. John and Sindra were experiencing a challenging period in their marriage. According to what I learned, Sindra spent an evening out with her friends and either was medicated or drank excessively, resulting in her sleeping with another man. She was remorseful and confessed to John upon her return, yet the harm was irreversible. They had 2 young sons at this time, and a divorce would have been catastrophic. The The Sindra video was the briefest and depicted her staggering into a hotel room. It was clear that a cell phone camera was placed on a dresser. She moved like a zombie and was fixated on the king-size bed. Eric appeared and disrobed the bewildered Sindra. Initially, I assumed there was no audio, but it was simply because there was no dialogue. While I had admired Sindra in a bikini at the lake, seeing her stand undressed left me dumbfounded. Now I understood John's hesitation to part with her. Eric forcefully placed her on the bed with no gentleness or warmth. He engaged in intercourse with Sindra until he climaxed. After satisfying himself, he took a drink from the mini fridge and lit a cigarette. Slowly, Sindra made her way to the bathroom, collected herself, dressed, and exited. Throughout this exchange, no words were uttered by either party. JN had always been curious about what had happened, and now I had some evidence in case he sought vengeance. I invited John over for a private discussion. After drinking a few beers, he broached the confidential matter, oblivious to my findings. I revealed to John that I had inadvertently discovered a video showing his wife engaged in a sexual encounter with another man. It seemed to me that she might have been influenced by drugs, alcohol, or both. I proposed to reveal the man's identity, show him the video, or both, depending on which option would cause him the least upset. It took a while for John to collect himself. His eyes welled up with tears, and he breathed deeply. I put a reassuring hand on his shoulder and remained silent. Who was his only response. It's my brother Eric, but she despises him, considers him stupid. Why would she be intimate with Eric? As I explained John, she appeared disoriented. I'll play the video to prove she wasn't initiating the interaction. After watching the video, John recognized the unknown man who had been intimate with his wife following an evening out with the girls several years back. She was unaware of his name or the motives for their encounter as she tearfully recounted the event to John. He tried to maintain his composure and questioned why this man would be intimate with an employee's wife. She explained that it was a singular incident and he hadn't contacted her afterward. My theory, John, is that he wasn't concerned with her identity. He simply pursued the most attractive woman and got intimate with her. He didn't have to know her name, only her body, I reasoned. As John stood, he expressed his gratitude, mentioning that this discovery was surprisingly helpful. He had previously forgiven her because of her remorse and anguish. Now, armed with the truth, he was unsure whether to inform Sindra or not. Opting to see how things unfold, he asked if he could retain the video, to which I agreed, noting it was probably the only copy. He humorously spoke of potentially harming his brother in the future, ensuring his alibis were sound. We embraced, and as he left, he encouraged me to keep in touch, recognizing our close relationship. I didn't spend much time reviewing the videos of Carol and Eric. It just wasn't worth the trouble and troubled my conscience. Eventually, I decided to delete all recordings that bore Carol's name. I never wanted to see those tapes again. However, destiny played a hand as I was erasing the files, leading me to press play instead of delete. What I saw was more repulsive than I had imagined. Carol was on her knees facing the camera, displaying a jubilant expression. It was clear she wasn't lying when she claimed she forgot her husband, family, friends, and school when she was with Eric. She appeared to be thoroughly enjoying herself, even making noises reminiscent of a witch. Witnessing the woman I once admired degrading herself in this manner was devastating. This scene shattered every positive notion I had ever formed about her. 2 weeks later, John visited for a beer to express his appreciation for answering questions that had troubled him for years. He also acknowledged my confirmation that Sindra had been sexually violated, not involved in an affair. He proposed using the remaining recordings to expose unfaithful wives and assist husbands wronged by Eric's actions. I gladly handed over the remaining videos to him. Meanwhile, my job hunting efforts were successful. A rival of Tyndall's contacted me for an interview in their city, situated 100 miles away. This provided a glimmer of hope after a prolonged period of turmoil. I made myself available for the interview at their convenience. The Donan Corporation, led by CEO and President Tim Donan, offered me an attractive employment package on par with that of my peers. The next step was a meeting with the head of Reynolds Resources for a personality assessment. Given my recent hardships, I couldn't help but feel nervous about what they might uncover. The next morning, I was scheduled to meet with Mickey D. Reynolds, the owner of Reynolds Resources. Beyond personality assessments, Reynolds Resources handled HR functions, employee recruitment, corporate governance, and reporting for various sectors, including donut manufacturing. Tim had explained how this relieved him of administrative burdens, as he preferred concentrating on projects rather than paperwork. Their office boasted a contemporary and minimalist design, a stark contrast to Doan's more conventional manufacturing setting. After providing my name to the receptionist, I was offered coffee and a seat on the sofa while waiting for Mickey D to meet with me. Surprisingly, Mickey D was an attractive woman, probably in her early 30s. She appeared unfazed by my initial stumbling over words as we introduced ourselves with a handshake. Her grip was firm yet unmistakably feminine, which I found appealing. Throughout the next few hours, we had conversations about my abilities, preferences, and views on engineering. Our discussions were courteous and pleasant. She tactfully broached the subject of my departure from my long-term position at Tyndall, even though she admitted she should avoid personal inquiries. She left it up to me to disclose as much as I was comfortable with. All I revealed was that I had been passed over for the role of president and felt inadequately compensated for my contributions. "Oh my Joe, it's already 11:45 and you must be getting hungry," she commented. "I'll forward my report to Tim and he will provide you with more information." She then inquired whether it would violate company policies to invite me to lunch, likening it to offering a new hire a tour of the Chamber of Commerce. With a cunning grin, she said, "I'd really enjoy that now," marking the beginning of numerous lunches that eventually led to dinners and more over the ensuing months. I was reluctant to begin a new relationship, yet I discovered joy in her company. Her responses indicated she appreciated the slow build and development of our bond. Meanwhile, Tyndall Manufacturing was experiencing financial trouble. Despite having sufficient funds to settle all debts, the funds were simply not accessible. Edward was compelled to swiftly utilize emergency reserves to sustain the company as creditors and suppliers demanded immediate payment. This inflicted considerable harm on the firm's reputation, with suppliers insisting on cash payments up front, drastically impacting their operational finances. Gradually, I confided in Mickey D about the upheaval in my personal and professional life. She showed understanding, having endured her own difficulties when her husband was tragically killed by a UPS truck 2 years earlier. Around this time, John relayed to me an episode where someone assaulted Eric in a dimly lit bar parking lot. After enduring multiple blows with a steel pipe, Eric pleaded for mercy. The attacker then aggressively twisted Eric's middle finger until it broke, declaring, "That's for meddling with my wife. My tenure at Donan brought immense satisfaction as I embraced my new responsibilities, unencumbered by any non-compete clause with Tyndall. I started to draw their top clients. Aware of my separation from Tyndall, they were keen to obtain my contact details. Although I didn't possess Eric's knack for sales, I was more adept at understanding and fulfilling their needs more efficiently, quickly, and cost-effectively than Tyndall. 6 months after finalizing my divorce, my connection with Mickey deepened. Beyond her beauty, intellect, and kindness, she was delightful to be around. After numerous outings and strengthening our bond, our interactions became more intimate. One night, as we danced unusually close, she looked up with those captivating eyes and proposed. "Should we leave?" "Definitely," I responded, kissing her with increased fervor. Our restraint waned during the ride home. It was nearly heedless, fueled by a surge of endorphins. There was no hurried ripping of clothes. Instead, we gently undressed each other in her bedroom, exploring each other with our hands. Our breathing and heart rates escalated. "Did you bring protection?" she murmured. "No, I'm sterile." "That's why Carol had Eric's child," I answered. "What did the doctor say about your sterility?" "No, doctor, my mum mentioned I had MPS during childhood, rendering me unable to father Carol's child. But she's the same person who deceived you about your father and encouraged your wife to be unfaithful with your brother. I wouldn't trust anything she says. You should seek a medical opinion for yourself now. I'm prepared for some extraordinary lovemaking by morning. We had engaged in lovemaking several times, and I believed she might have exceeded that count. After we had exhausted all our physical energy, but the topic of my fertility arose. I committed to consulting a fertility specialist and undergoing tests. I had to wait a week for my body to regenerate a semen count comparable to what it was last weekend following an uncomfortable incident at the medical clinic. I was instructed to return in a week for the findings. Since Mickey had shown interest in this issue, I invited her to join me for the next appointment. The doctor quickly informed us that I was not sterile. My semen count was a moderate 25 million, below the normal range of 50 to 100 million, but with average motility. He stated that unless we were eager to conceive, there was no concern regarding fertility issues. He suggested that taking some vitamins and reducing excessive drinking might help somewhat. His primary advice was to avoid obsessing over conception. It resembles a game of luck where my semen meets your partner's egg by chance. Even though the odds were slim, it wasn't out of the question. Mickey resumed birth control, and I started using contraceptives. For several months, we entertained the idea of cohabitation, perhaps following the holiday season. However, first she wanted me to meet her parents. They believed she was dating a wonderful man, as she had described me, and they were eager for him to visit. This could mark the start of a genuine family life for me. As we approached a large but modest house, just as the door swung open, Mickey moved ahead and embraced the man in grey pants and a red Christmas sweater. She turned slightly and introduced us. "Daddy, this is Joe Tyndall, the man I adore." "Joe, this is my dad," I interjected, "Mr. Donan O. Tim, I had no idea she was your daughter. I'm at a loss for words. It's a pleasure to meet you, Tim, and thank you for having me. Why didn't you mention Tim was your father?" "Shouldn't I have known?" "Yes, Joe, that's precisely why we kept it from you. I wanted to see if you were drawn to me or my potential inheritance. I also aimed to sidestep any complications from colleagues about you dating the boss's daughter and likely future leader of the company. She, like her, had a younger brother who passed away at 16. So what does being invited to Christmas dinner with your family mean for me? Is it merely personal, or does it affect us in some way?" "Joe, it signifies I love you and desire for you to meet my family. It has no connection to our relationship. Since you mentioned you have no family, I'm inviting you to spend Christmas with mine, all right? Now I get it about Mickey D. The D stands for Donan. Am I that?" Out of touch, she laughed, teasing, "Perhaps you should append a D to your name as well, for duh." We all laughed at that joke. With everything explained, we enjoyed a delightful afternoon and an evening. I was pleased to acquaint myself with Tim and Mickey's mother, Barbara. Though I might be naive, I felt proposing to Mickey would be warmly received by her parents, and I was confident Mickey would say yes. As I proposed with a blue velvet box, she briefly halted her kisses to joyfully exclaim, "Yes, yes, yes," before resuming her loving embrace, leaving me elated in the best way imaginable. 3 months later, we held a small wedding on my side of the church with just John, Sindra, and a few new acquaintances. After a honeymoon in the Caribbean, we returned to my apartment to begin our life together. Our first endeavor was for Mickey to stop taking her birth control pills. We understood it might take some time before my semen encountered her egg, so we embarked on the journey ahead with optimism. We visited the county courthouse to alter our names. Mickey D. Reynolds reverted to her maiden name, Mickey Donan, mirroring society's more inclusive stance on gender identity, marital status, and personal names. I chose to become Joseph Timothy Donan. When we asked for Tim's approval, he was both honored and touched that I took the Donan name. With tears streaming down his face, he murmured, "Thank you, son." My friend John uncovered a file involving Carol and Eric and felt compelled to act on behalf of our mutual betrayals. John's son, Tyler, was the same age as the boys at Carol's school and participated in sports with them. Tyler provided JN with the email addresses of various junior and senior boys under a new pseudonym. JN then sent each of these boys a video of Carol and Eric with the subject line "Principal's Lesson" in Class 101. A week later, while navigating the school corridor during the break between classes, Carol was surprised by the distinct sound of barking. Turning towards the noise, she noticed a few senior boys grinning in her direction. She initially thought something might be amiss with her attire, but as she faced forward again, she encountered barking from another cluster of boys. Remembering the school's bulldog mascot, she interpreted it as possibly a motivational tactic for the upcoming Friday game. When she entered the office, the barking stopped, yet it picked up again once she exited, echoing from one corridor end to the other, reminiscent of a dog shelter during mealtime, interspersed with sporadic howls. The following day, stepping onto the asphalt of the parking area felt like being at the starting line of the Iditarod sled race in Alaska, all eyes on her. She quickly retreated back inside, feeling a sense of relief as the doors closed behind her. However, while walking towards her office, she heard a lone male voice mimicking a dog's bark, chillingly similar to Eric's. She suddenly realized that the boys had access to the videos of her intimate moments with Eric. She skipped questioning how the video leaked and immediately considered the repercussions on her position, reputation, and self-respect. She rushed into her office and forcefully closed the door. Were her colleagues looking at her with knowing smirks? Did they see what happened? Who had seen the video? What was her next step? Halfway into the first period, with the hallways empty, she dashed from her office. Over her shoulder she mentioned she felt ill and was going home, a true statement since she felt sick. Yet she drove straight to Tyndall MFG. Storming into Eric's office, she confronted him. "Did you share videos of our private moments? If you did, I swear I'll end you." Eric, sensing her intense anger, quickly fumbled his words. "No, they're all here. I'm the only keeper." He indicated his computer and showed the file. "You idiot, we've been hacked. They're everywhere, and my life is shattered." Could this get any worse? In despair, she broke down on the floor, overwhelmed by uncertainty. Eric hurried to get his father, and together they helped her back to her home, then returned to their duties. 5 years later, Carol resigned from her role as principal after losing the esteem of her colleagues, students, and the school board. A new position was created for her, capitalizing on her knowledge in a secluded basement office where she reviewed state and national policies and guidelines with limited interaction with colleagues and none with students. She dressed in flannel pajama pants and soft slippers, arriving at work at 6 a.m. and departing before the school day concluded. Her reputation forced her into a life of a recluse, necessitating out-of-town trips for groceries. Sam frequently was sent home for fighting, a challenge given his peers mockingly. Called his mother Lassie. Initially, some men showed interest, sending dog treats with their contact details, hoping for her reply. Tyndall Manufacturing's finances plummeted post her departure, losing clients to Don in manufacturing with increased executive costs and Eric's poor leadership further impairing the company's financial health. To settle debts, Edward had to sell the family's cherished 160-acre farm, slated for development into moderately priced homes. A business broker secured a buyer for the business, leading Edward to sell it, thus concluding the family enterprise. Edward and Sally moved into a modest apartment, consuming a significant part of their Social Security benefits. When Edward and Sally die, the only trace of the Tyndall name in town will be on tombstones. Eric and Sam moved on, pursuing new careers as a used car dealer and a fast food worker, respectively. On July's initial date, the firm's purchaser organized a gathering for the entire workforce to introduce the new executive. Neither Edward nor Eric received an invitation, yet the newly appointed workshop supervisor, John Brown, seized the attention of all and declared, "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our new chief, Mr. Joe Donan." The staff experienced relief upon learning that a competing company had taken over, not a massive enterprise that could dismantle the operation and lay off the team. The genuine astonishment unfolded when I wandered out from the office, murmuring and scanning the room. "Greetings, it's pleasant to return to this place. Have you missed my presence?" This was met with robust acclaim. Apparently, Eric lacked the leadership prowess he presumed. Following my assurances to the employees at Don and Manufacturing about the prospective expansion and renewed purpose for the former Tyndall manufacturing site, they began chanting, "Donan, Donan, Donan." Certainly the inscription on the edifice and on your earnings statements will transition to Donan Manufacturing, I proclaimed, prompting further cheering. "Your warm reception is greatly appreciated. I am convinced that this changeover will be advantageous for every one of us. Please allow me to introduce my spouse Mickey D. and our offspring Timothy Joseph Donan. Indeed, genetic verification affirms that he is indeed my offspring." Do not forget to subscribe to our channel to avoid your significant other's infidelity, and stay tuned for an upcoming tale that's even more sensational than this one. Should you be younger than 18, please abstain from the forthcoming story.